She was smart, driven, and respected. But behind closed doors, Meredith Sullivan Chapman wasn't the woman her resume made her out to be. What looked like ambition and leadership was hiding something else entirely, a risky obsession that would eventually lead to a brutal end. Meredith had it all: a successful career as a communications professor, a reputation in politics, and a bright future. But none of that was enough. The same woman who stood at podiums preaching professionalism was secretly building a romance with her new assistant, Mark Gerardo, a man nearly 2 decades older, married, and supposedly loyal to his wife of 25 years. Mark wasn't just a colleague. He was her employee, hired to manage marketing under Meredith's leadership. He came from out of state, leaving behind his longtime wife, Jenna, who stayed behind to finalize their move. Meredith saw the perfect opportunity, and she took it. Just 2 weeks after Mark arrived, she invited him for drinks. That night didn't end at the bar, and it wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of something they both knew crossed the line. Meredith didn't hesitate. While her own husband, Luke Chapman, was still living under the same roof, she threw caution to the wind. She and Mark started seeing each other in secret, while Jenna, still in another state, had no idea her husband was already building a life with someone else. It wasn't about love, it was about control. Meredith knew the power she held, not just professionally, but emotionally. And Mark? He fell for it. Even when Jenna finally moved to the new city and joined her husband, Meredith kept the affair going. She knew Jenna was there. She knew the situation was messy, but she didn't care. For her, it was about winning. Mark tried to pull away once, but Meredith wouldn't let go. She pulled him back in, and he came running. Meredith eventually told her husband it was over. A peaceful divorce. No drama. No questions. She was free now. But Mark? Still married, still tangled, still lying. And yet, Meredith didn't wait. She resigned from her job, moved into a new house, and handed Mark a place beside her, not just personally, but professionally again. He followed, and Jenna watched it all crumble. But that wasn't the whole story. Jenna wasn't some clueless wife sitting quietly in the background. She saw the signs. She tracked the movements. She collected the proof. While Meredith and Mark played house, Jenna was watching. She knew the bars they met at, the apartment they used, the time they spent together while she waited alone in a new city with no job, no family, and no future. On Valentine's Day, Jenna finally confronted Mark. He denied it, of course, promised to stop, promised to fix things. But days later, he was back with Meredith, lies on top of lies. And Jenna? She snapped, because what happened next would shake everyone to the core. Jenna wasn't blind, just patient. While Mark spun stories and played the doting husband in public, she was already 2 steps ahead. Suspicion became certainty the moment she hired a private investigator. What she found would make anyone's blood run cold. Photos, locations, times, proof. It was all there. Mark wasn't just cheating. He was building a second life, sneaking off to secret meetups with Meredith, lying about late work nights while Jenna waited alone in a city she never wanted to move to. She gave up everything for him, and this was her reward? She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She gathered evidence. Jenna tracked his every move with GPS devices, spyware on his phone, and even monitoring software on their home computer. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't a fling. This was betrayal at the highest level. And Mark? He lied straight to her face. When Jenna finally confronted him, he looked her in the eye and denied it all. Not just once, but over and over. Even with photos in her hand, he told her she was imagining things, that she was paranoid, that she needed help. And when she wouldn't back down, he made a promise he'd end it. But it was a promise he never intended to keep. Within days, he was back in Meredith's arms. More secret meetings, more fake excuses. And Jenna? She knew. She watched. She listened. And she waited. Because while Mark was busy playing house with his younger boss, Jenna was planning something far more permanent. She waited, watched, and planned. And on April 23, 2018, Jenna Gerardo made her move. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a decision. Calculated, cold, and irreversible. That day, Jenna arrived in Meredith's quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood long before anyone noticed. Wearing a disguise, she parked blocks away in a black Chevrolet. No one questioned the car. No one recognized the woman behind the wig. But Jenna knew exactly what she was doing. She had studied their routine for days, waiting for the perfect moment. And now it had come. She forced her way into the house through a back window. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Inside, everything looked calm. But Jenna wasn't there to talk. She had brought a weapon. And when Meredith walked through the door alone, completely unaware, Jenna was already waiting. Within seconds, the silence shattered. One fatal shot, then another. Just like that, Meredith Sullivan, once a rising star with a flawless image, was gone. All because she crossed the wrong woman. But Jenna wasn't done. Minutes later, she turned the gun on herself, leaving behind a bloody scene that shocked everyone who knew them. And yet, the most disturbing part wasn't the act itself. It was how far she went to make it happen. Because what came out in the investigation was even more twisted than anyone expected. Mark showed up expecting dinner and celebration. It was supposed to be a fresh start, new jobs, new city, new life with Meredith. But instead, he walked into silence. The kind of silence that makes your chest tighten before you even open the door. The lights were on. Meredith's car was in the driveway, but something was off. The front door was unlocked, the kind of careless mistake Meredith never made. And then, the smell, the kind that stops you in your tracks. When Mark stepped into the kitchen, what he saw would haunt him forever. 2 bodies, 2 women, 1 brutal scene. Meredith, the woman he had left everything behind for, was lying lifeless on the floor. Across from her, Jenna, the wife he betrayed, was also gone. Blood soaked the tile. The room was frozen in time, and Mark's voice cracked as he screamed for help, but it was far too late. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. At first, they didn't know what to make of it. A man caught between 2 women, now both dead in the same house. It didn't take long for whispers to start. Was this a twisted love triangle gone wrong? Was Mark hiding something? But investigators were quick to follow the evidence. The gun was found beneath Jenna's body. Her prints were the only ones on it. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a second person involved. Surveillance, phone records, and timelines all pointed to one conclusion. Jenna had entered the house alone and carried out the act herself. Legally, Mark was in the clear. He wasn't charged. He wasn't even held overnight. The case was closed just days later with no suspects remaining. But just because he wasn't guilty in the eyes of the law doesn't mean people saw him as innocent. Because when you dig a little deeper, it becomes harder to let him off the hook. This wasn't just some tragic coincidence. This was a disaster set in motion long before Jenna ever stepped foot inside that house. Mark had lied to his wife, strung her along, fed her false hope, all while building a secret life with another woman. And when Jenna tried to salvage what was left, he pushed her away, over and over again. He told her it was over, promised he'd stop, then kept going behind her back. He made his choice, and when things spiraled out of control, he was the only one left standing. So yes, Mark didn't pull the trigger. But ask yourself this: would either of those women be dead if he hadn't played both sides? But what he did next took things to a whole new level, and it left people questioning whether he ever really felt any guilt at all. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a mission, planned, prepared, and executed with chilling precision. Jenna didn't just snap. She mapped it out, step by step. Weeks before the final moment, she rented a car under a different name, bought a wig, and started tracking their every move. Morning routines, work schedules, dinner habits. She knew when they left, when they got home, and when Meredith would be alone. Neighbors later admitted they had seen a woman sitting in a black Chevrolet parked near the house. No one thought much of it, just another face blending in. But that was the disguise. That was Jenna. She walked through their neighborhood like a ghost, watching, waiting, blending in. Every night, she went home to the same silence Mark had left her in, while he played house with his new life. And every day, she collected more information. This wasn't some emotional meltdown. It was a strategy. She even practiced. Authorities later found evidence, handwritten notes, timestamps, location data, all showing how long she'd been preparing. She had even scoped out the layout of the home, learning where to enter and how to avoid being seen. By the time April 23rd came around, she wasn't lost or confused. She was locked in. And yet, while she did everything to hide her actions, one thing still slipped through the cracks. Everything about this case was messy, but the part that truly made people pause wasn't just the affair or the violence. It was what came after. Buried in the paperwork was a life insurance policy, $500,000, and the name listed as the sole beneficiary? Luke Chapman, Meredith's ex-husband, the man she had left, the one she emotionally checked out from years before. Somehow, he was still tied to her final chapter, not emotionally, but financially. The policy had been in place long before their divorce. And like many people, Meredith never updated the details. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she didn't think it mattered. Or maybe, just maybe, she didn't expect her life to end in such a brutal, public way. But now, a man who hadn't been part of her daily life in years was about to receive a $500,000 payout, just because his name hadn't been removed. Investigators didn't ignore the red flag. With so much money involved and so many motives already tangled in the story, they had to take a closer look. Was Luke aware of the policy? Had he kept tabs on Meredith and Mark's relationship? Could he have been in contact with Jenna? Detectives combed through phone logs, emails, travel history. They looked for any shred of evidence tying Luke to the lead-up of the murder. Nothing turned up. No suspicious calls. No hidden messages. No contact with Jenna. Not even a remote sign that he knew what was coming. He was cleared, legally. But publicly? That was a different story. People weren't convinced. Online forums lit up with speculation. Was it really just an accident that he never pushed to change the policy after the divorce? Was it possible he had quietly hoped to benefit from Meredith's death without lifting a finger? And when her grieving family reached out, heartbroken, shocked, and barely holding it together, they asked Luke one thing: return the money. Not all of it, just enough to help cover funeral costs and honor Meredith's legacy. But Luke refused. No apology, no compromise. He kept the money, cold, clean, and by the book. Her parents filed a lawsuit, hoping to at least reclaim part of what they believed was never meant for him. The court eventually ordered him to return only 10% of the payout, just a fraction. The rest, he got to keep. The judge claimed there was no bad intent, that Luke didn't manipulate the policy or scheme for profit, but that didn't change how it felt. A man Meredith had emotionally left years ago now walked away $500,000 richer, while the people who truly loved her were left with ashes and court filings. It didn't sit right with anyone. Not her family, not the public, not the community that once looked up to them as a power couple. But as all eyes turned on Luke for answers, the real storm was just beginning. Because Mark Gerardo, at the center of it all, was about to step forward. And what he did next would send shockwaves through everyone who thought this story was over. Months after the tragedy, when most people expected him to lay low, Mark Gerardo did the unthinkable. He wrote a book, a full-length memoir, page after page, telling the world his version of events. Not from a place of silence or regret, but with a voice that sounded more polished than remorseful. He titled it like a story of healing. He framed it as reflection. But to many, it felt more like a cash grab. A man at the center of a deadly love triangle, now standing in the spotlight, not for answers, but for attention. The book detailed his relationships with both women, his long marriage to Jenna, and the secret romance with Meredith. He described their personalities, their flaws, and their emotional battles, but somehow managed to keep himself out of the fire. It read less like a confession and more like a carefully crafted PR campaign. He painted himself as the man torn between two worlds, the devoted husband who fell into temptation, the grieving survivor who never meant for any of this to happen. But readers weren't buying it. Some people said the book helped them understand what really happened behind closed doors, that it gave closure, that it humanized the pain. But others weren't so forgiving. They saw it for what it truly was: exploitation. One woman ends up dead, another takes her own life, and the man caught in the middle turns around and turns their story into a product, a bestseller. It didn't sit right, especially when interviews followed, talk shows, press appearances, headlines. It was clear Mark wasn't just trying to heal, he was building a brand. And just like that, he went from office assistant to author. But what people couldn't stop asking was simple. If he truly felt broken, why was he the only one profiting from the pain? Because this story wasn't just about heartbreak, it became a warning. A reminder that sometimes the villain doesn't carry a weapon. Sometimes he just holds the pen. 2 funerals, 2 completely different endings. Meredith's remains were cremated and quietly returned to her family, who were left with nothing but ashes and unanswered questions. Jenna was buried back home in Indiana, far from the chaos she created. But even in death, the story didn't feel finished. Because there's one part that still chills people to this day. Mark was supposed to be there too. Many believe he was meant to die that night. That Jenna's plan wasn't just revenge against the woman who took her husband, but against the man who lied, betrayed, and left her behind. She knew their schedule. She studied their habits. She waited for the moment they'd both be inside that house. But fate had other plans. Meredith arrived first. Mark was running late, and that delay, those few extra minutes, might be the only reason he's still alive. It's hard to ignore how close he came. Harder still to ignore the way he talks about it, like he's a victim, too. But let's be honest, if he had shown up 5 minutes earlier, the story may have ended in 3 bodies, not 2. And while the world mourned 2 women caught in heartbreak and obsession, Mark got to keep living, writing, speaking, and profiting. He walked away untouched. So while people argue over Jenna's mental state and Meredith's choices, there's one question that still hangs in the air. How did he walk away from all of this without a single scar? Because when all is said and done, one fact remains: only the wrong people died.